Hi there, it is Anne-Marie, the anti-HR lady. Welcome to my channel where I talk about employee workplace rights and try to position employees to understand their workplace rights and leverage them in their workplace when they're being subjected to wrongdoing of any kind, but especially when you're being subjected to discrimination and other illegal acts by your employer. So if that's of interest to you, please hit the subscribe button and comment, like, and share it with a friend. So I want to say a couple words about OJ Simpson and some lessons and takeaways I think that we can learn from the conversations that are now happening again about OJ Simpson and the OJ Simpson case now that OJ Simpson has passed away. And OJ Simpson passed away on April 10th. Apparently he had cancer and he has gone on to his just rewards, whatever that might be. But that being said, I was in my 20s when the OJ Simpson case occurred, when the trial occurred. I was pretty young. I was actually applying to law schools at that time, but I had not yet gotten into law school. And it was all anyone was talking about. I was working at a nonprofit at the time, primarily staffed and run by white women. So you can imagine the conversations that I had to listen to at the time about their opinions and so on. But for me, my feelings about that case when I was in my early 20s are very different than my feelings about it now that I'm in my 50s. And have now, I'm a licensed barred attorney. I went to law school. I studied the case in law school. I remember spending a lot of time studying the case in my civil procedure class, actually, where we looked at all of the evidence from the criminal case and also looked at the evidence from the civil case to determine and understand better why, based on one standard of proof, Mr. Simpson was acquitted versus how he was found guilty when the preponderance of the evidence standard, which is a standard in civil cases, was applied. And that was a very interesting exercise. And I will say it did change my opinion about a lot of things relevant to that case when I went through that exercise. But this, for me, is really not a conversation about whether or not one believes Mr. Simpson was guilty or innocent. For me, the lessons to be understood from that case is more about, if you pay attention, it really sheds a lot of light on the way systems of power work in the United States of America. And these are systems of power, whether you are dealing with the criminal justice system or whether you're dealing with your workplace and human resources when you have a problem. And the primary and central takeaway for me is that you have to understand that in order to win at the game, you have to understand the game. Right? And you have to understand that you're functioning inside of a structure, whether you want to consider it a game or you just want to consider it a system. You have to understand the system to beat the system. And for me, this case relevant to OJ Simpson was never really about innocence or guilt. Because the fact of the matter is, in the criminal justice system, the standard is not about innocence or guilt. It's about whether or not the prosecution can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant committed the crime that they're accused of. The jury does not come back with a verdict of innocent or guilty. They come back with a verdict of guilty or not guilty. Being found not guilty is not the same thing as a declaration of innocence. It's not the same thing, though most people want to believe that it is. All it means is that the state didn't meet the burden. And they didn't prove the crime occurred to the satisfaction of the standard required. And therefore, the defendant goes free, whether they did it or not. That's the way it works. But the real thing is that getting to that outcome is very much tied to your means and your resources. And a guilty person or an innocent person is most likely to get the verdict they want if they have a lot of money. And so what was most fascinating for me as I, studied the case later is really that Mr. Simpson was able to use the criminal justice system that was set up to primarily benefit white people, especially wealthy white people, And he was able to win because he understood, or at least had attorneys that understood the system and were able to use that system to his benefit during his criminal trial. What do I mean by that? Well, he had the best attorneys. They called them the Dream Team at the time, headed by Johnny Cochran, but not, may he rest in peace. But not just Johnny Cochran. He had Mr. Kardashian, Kim's daddy. He had, who else did he have? I'm actually going to look it up because it's been such a long time ago. But he had the best criminal defense money could buy at the time, right? He had, if they were a top attorney in Los Angeles, they were representing OJ Simpson. He also had a prosecution that made a lot of mistakes, and that shouldn't be lost either. But the most important thing to me is that he had an all-black jury. And how many times throughout the history of America have all-white juries acquitted very obviously guilty people? From the times of Emmett Till and before that, that has been the case. And so what is most fascinating was that this wealthy black man, who, in the opinion of most white people then and most white people now, was guilty of sin, was able to use the same system that they created for themselves to get off and to get acquitted, right? Whether or not he did it or not, we will never know. But the jury found him not guilty because he was able, through his defense team and the all-black jury that he had, to be found not guilty. Now, when he went to civil trial, where the burden was different, was a preponderance of the evidence, and he did not have an all-black jury, he was found guilty, right? And so it's just indicative of the way that the system works, right? But it was very interesting to see a wealthy black man use the same system that wealthy white people have used forever and have it work the same way. And I think that's what enraged many white people, even though they won't admit it, more than anything else, was to see a black man using their system and benefiting from it, right? And I think it's what made many black people happy, was to see a wealthy black man using their system and winning, right? Whether he did it or not, because that was never the question. The question was whether or not the prosecution could prove it, right? And they put on not a very good case, and the jury, the all-black jury, acquitted Mr. Simpson, right? But I think it's very interesting that he understood that he was going to have to get representation that could, benefit him and beat the system. And because he had the means to do so, he was acquitted. And so the same thing can be said about when you are in your workplace interacting with human resources and a management that are always going to be aligned against you as an employee if you raise issues of illegality, wrongdoing, especially if you raise issues of discrimination, is that you need to go into these situations understanding the system, really understanding it, because if you don't, you will not win. In order to win, you have to understand the system, have to understand how to relate to the system so that you can beat the system. And you need to have someone in your corner who understands the system to help you understand it. Here on this YouTube channel, that is what I try to do. With my clients, that is what I do. I teach them how the system works so that they can know how to beat it. Because it is a system. And it's not about whether or not you have the facts on your side or whether or not your employer is guilty of allowing discrimination and retaliation against you. It's all about whether you can prove it and whether you know how to use the proof that you have to get the outcome that you want, whether that outcome is for them to pay you, for you to leave your employment, or whether it is that you want a different outcome. But you will not beat this system if you do not understand it. You will not beat it if you don't know how to play the game. And what I try to do is to explain the game and teach you how to play it so that you can win. And over the last several weeks, I have been putting up videos about different laws because I really want you guys to understand what your rights are. Because the only way that you can raise your hand and say, I think my rights are being violated here, is if you actually know you have rights and what they are. And it's been very interesting to see that these videos that I've done about, the Fair Labor Standards Act, about the Family Medical Leave Act, about the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, and the Americans with Disability Act are some of my lowest viewed videos. You guys apparently are not interested in those videos. You are watching other content on my channel much more than you're watching that. But, which, is disappointing, to be honest. But I'm going to keep making those videos until I finish that series. I have a couple more because I think it is incredibly important for you guys as employees to understand that these laws exist and what they mean for your rights in the workplace, because they are a part of the system and the structure of how your workplaces operate, about why HR gives you certain information when you get hired, about even the policies that are in the handbook that most of you all are not reading. Why they are there is because of laws that require that your employer behave in a certain way. And despite those laws, many of them are still violating your workplace rights. And most of you don't even recognize it until it's damn near too late. And then, of course, some of you will call me and expect me to be able to just snap my fingers and help you fix it. And that's not the way this works. You have to be more educated as employees. You have to understand your workplace rights. And you have to recognize when they are being violated as early as possible so that you can mitigate the harm that your employer, with the help of HR, often means to do to you. For example, recently had an employee come to me about an issue that she is dealing with at work and multiple instances of wrongdoing and discrimination against her in her workplace, right? And it's very clear cut discrimination in her workplace. And she says to me, she went to HR, she raised these issues, they've been ghosting her, not doing anything about the problem. And the person kept assuring her that they were going to help her, and then they weren't helping her. And she was so surprised that this person in HR was obviously lying to her and giving her the runaround. I wasn't surprised. And I had to explain to her that, that's modus operandi for HR. And so if you just go up to HR and have a meeting and talk to them and don't do anything else, you're likely to get crickets or other things that they may do, none of which is to your benefit. And so one of the things I advised her to do was to write a follow-up email to HR, documenting the meeting she had with them, which she had not done, right? And so again, understanding your workplace right coupled with effectively documenting will get you further than not doing either one of those things, or just doing one of them, right? And I always tell people, you don't go to HR unless you have a strategy and you're ready to execute it. And going to HR is part of the execution of your strategy. If you go to HR blindly without a plan or a strategy, you're going to get screwed as an employee. If you go to HR without any clear understanding of what your workplace rights are, you're going to get screwed. If you go to HR and you haven't even read the handbook, you don't even know what the policies say, you're probably going to get screwed, right? So it's your responsibility as an employee to educate yourselves, right? Whether it's through watching this channel or whether it's through getting advice elsewhere, you guys have got to educate yourself about your workplace rights and about how to exercise them. And so one of the takeaways is, the main takeaway to me about this whole situation as people, revisit the OJ Simpson case is that he understood that there was a system and that he was going to need to have the best defense money could buy in order to protect himself from that system. And that's what he did. And that's what employees need to do. It's not a question about whether who's in the right or who's in the wrong. It's a question of whether you understand how to play the game. And so for me, that is the primary takeaway. You can tell me in the comments what your primary takeaway is. But this is not a debate about guilt or innocence. If you come into my comments and you start talking about whether he did it or whether you think he did it or whatever, I'm probably going to block you, because that's not what this is about. This is about whether or not you understand that there is a system at play and you have to know how to operate inside of the system in order to get the outcome that you want. And it is very clear that Mr. Simpson understood that then, and he understood it very, very well. And that is why he was able to prevail. Okay. And so, in the end, things turned out as they did. As you know, he did end up spending time in prison. And I have my own theories about, how that came to be as well. And a big role in that, in my opinion, is about hubris. And I've talked about employer hubris. But there are also people who are, prideful and full of themselves. And I think that if Mr. Simpson had taken the win that he got and went and retired into private life, never to be heard from again, he would have probably not have ended up in prison. But some people don't know how to leave well enough alone. Let's just put it that way, right? Remember Robert Blake? I always like to talk about Robert Blake because, people forget about Robert Blake. But Robert Blake also, in many opinions, got away with murder. He was found not guilty for the murder of his wife. If you read about the evidence in that case, it still fascinates me. But again, he had very good defense. And one can argue the prosecution didn't put on the best case. And he was acquitted. But you know what? After Mr. Blake was acquitted, you heard little or nothing from him after that. I don't even know if Mr. Blake is still alive or dead. That's how quiet he made himself. That's how small he made himself after he was acquitted and found not guilty of murder. OJ Simpson, on the other hand, couldn't be quiet. He just, every other minute, you were seeing him on the news about who he was dating, what he was doing. Then he was writing books and doing interviews. And so he kept himself fresh in the public mind until they finally found something they could get him on, and he ended up in the pokey. So another takeaway is a win is a win. Take the win, right? When you win, take it and go be quiet about it. Take your money and go on about your business and leave well enough alone. Sometimes that's the best order of business as well in these situations. And so I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned from OJ Simpson and the OJ Simpson case. But for me, the biggest one is that there is a system, there is a game. You got to learn how it works, and you got to learn how to play the game if you want to beat it. And so not educating yourself is not going to help you, especially in your workplace. The more you understand about how HR functions, the better off you are. And the more you understand and know about your workplace rights, the better off you will be as an employee, right? And so I hope that you guys who haven't watched the videos that I have made about different workplace laws will go and take a look at some of them and start the process of educating yourself about your workplace rights and better understanding the laws that exist to protect your workplace rights. Because as I said in a video, there's not a single law relevant to workplace rights in the United States that exists that somebody didn't suffer and in many cases die so that they could exist. Somebody suffered and struggled and in some cases died for these laws to exist. And so it really is important for employees to understand that these laws exist and to avail themselves of exercising their rights under these laws when they feel that their rights have been violated. And you can only do that if you understand the system, you have knowledge of the fact that these laws exist, and then you know how to exercise your rights. And so those are the things that I am trying very hard to, bring to the forefront for employees. I make this content and provide the information I do because I want employees to be more educated about their workplace rights so that they can exercise them, especially for employees who are Black women and for Black people and people of color, who are the people who are the targets, who are the people who experience this the most in the workplace. Not saying other people don't as well, because they do. But like I always say, when white people catch a cold, Black people catch pneumonia. So it's really important for us to understand these workplace rights and know how to exercise them, because it's never a question of if you're going to experience problems in your workplace when you are Black or a person of color. It's just a matter of when. And for Black women, it's a matter of when and how many times. So the more you know and the more you understand about the system, the better positioned you will be to beat it, right? So if there's anything that you can take away from that case, to me, that's the biggest HR takeaway, is that there's a system and that you have to learn how to play it in order to win. I hope that this video was helpful. If it was, please like, comment, and subscribe and share it with a friend. As always, I'm Anne Marie, the anti-HR HR lady. HR is not your enemy, but they are definitely not your friend. But I am. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.